I want to thank Nortel for their kindness to us today. And this is something they sent me, basically from their Transmitter Talk Tuesday.
Now, one other thing, this is a question that a lot of people have asked over the years, is like, we're talking about SNMP being able to monitor literally thousands of things. And how do you tell one thing from another? And the short answer is the OID, the object identifier. Every SNMP-enabled device has what's called a MIB, a management information base, just a database of everything it's monitoring. And if you look at the OID, the first 4 characters just generally relate to DND and internet-based. The 5-digit character you see, 28142, for example, is NOTL. 1 is our broadcast division, 300 is a VS300. So I can tell you by looking at the OID, assuming I have the MIB file, exactly what function is being monitored just by that series of numbers. The cool thing about that is that every single function for every single piece of equipment will have its own specific OID. So that OID, if you're looking at an SNMP manager, you know exactly what you're looking at. And that was just a cool little side note, because I know for me, SNMP was one of the harder things to wrap my head around. And then once I caught on to it, it's like, whoa.
So that's something from Nortel, and they think, they know, they've already scheduled it. All of next month are going to be IT-based programs. So you may find that of interest, and it's on Tuesdays with Jeff. Okay. Well, let's get to something, today's main topic, and that is maintenance practices, better maintenance practices. And I won't use that overworked term best practices, because every time I see a list that people have put out best practices for whatever, it turns out that they've left everything off. The FEMA one, I think, is one of my favorites. They're best practices in the emergency. And I think about the 8th or 9th thing is to check with your broadcast stations locally. So what I want to start with is the idea, maintenance-wise, starts with documentation. And here's a question I'll toss out, and maybe you want to answer this. I know Wayne's with us, and he knows the answer. What is a station log? What should be in a station log? Now you can either unmute yourself or raise your hand, and I'll recognize you. But do you know what belongs in a station log?
Sure. Yes.
Bryce.
Yes. EAS.
EAS, yes.
Also, if you're operating outside of parameters and you haven't yet gotten an STA because you're within that 10-day window, something you want to note.
Correct.
Tower lighting monitoring.
Absolutely.
Transmitter sign on time and sign off time.
Correct.
Who the operator is on duty.
No.
Buzz. Really? That's not required anymore?
No.
Yeah.
That's a new one on me. Thank you.
Signature of the chief operator reviewing the log.
Ah, okay. Now, how often does the CO review the log?
It's once a week or once every 7 days.
Correct. And what else do we need to know about the chief operator?
There has to be a letter designating somebody that's posted in the facility.
Correct. And not only just designating somebody as chief operator, but also the assistant chief operator.
Alternate.
Yeah. Even the FCC acknowledges that people go on vacation occasionally.
Barry, one of the things that I look for when doing inspections is that the chief operator and alternate designation letter is actually signed by the general manager or someone in the management level at the station. And the reason I look for that is because it to me, it demonstrates that there's a communication linkage between the engineering department and the management. I don't think that the requirements for the chief operator designation, I don't believe that it's intrinsically required that it's signed by the manager. And now, of course, there's no posting requirement per se. It just somewhere has to be available.
And that, of course, raises an interesting issue, because there are a few things like that that need to be available should there be an inspection. And yet there's no requirement that it be put in the control room or at the operating position. What control room, right?
Exactly.
Somebody else.
Especially with stations that are maybe licensed to serve one community, a license, they're a rim shot to something that's 50 miles away, and there's no studio locally. Where does the FCC go knocking on a door to go inspect?
Well, there is a contact place that is got to be given to the FCC, and a contact name and number. One of the issues that I have seen, the application, the media branch sent out a letter to someone I know that their application was missing something, and he didn't get that email because he was away. The station didn't know. Nobody else got the message, and the application was rejected. So it's very important to keep that contact information up to date. The LMS is probably the place to do that. And that's probably something that should be on everyone's list to make sure as they go through. I mean, you could do it the first of the year, you could do it through the year, to check to make sure that these things are up to date and correct.
And just practically speaking, the DCO needs to be someone vaguely local to the situation. If you're a contractor and you see the place once a month, once a quarter, every time they melt something into a socket, you can't be the chief operator because you're not there weekly or every 7 days to check anything.
Good.
That really,
I'll add to that. Does this chief operator need to be an engineer or licensed?
I'd say if you can keep a checklist and you're reasonably responsible. We took away the operator licensing part because we said that's the licensee's problem. I'd say the DCO's the same deal. But by that same rationale, are the owners double checking their management people? This person is an idiot, but we make the manager anyway.
Yeah, that's true. If I remember correctly, in fact, you have to be an employee of the station to be the chief operator. It cannot be a contractor.
That was what I knew last, Barry, when we switched from being owned by Scripps to Summit. We were under an LMA, and all of my coworkers were employed by the new company. I was still a Scripps employee for a couple of months because they still held the license, just because I was the chief operator.
Yeah.
I am thinking the last time we had language specifically saying it said it could be an employee or a contractor or part-time employee for any number of hours. I think that turns into semantics. If the work is getting done, I don't think it's a problem. If it's not getting done, no legal subtlety is going to defend you.
Probably true. Tim?
Yeah, I am a contract engineer for a college radio station in a major northeastern city. That's as far as I'll go. But I am an employee. While I am a contract engineer by trade now, they employed me as their engineer and their chief operator. I go there once a month, yes. I have a student liaison there who is very highly technically qualified, if I could speak for a living. So he kind of backs me up, and it's only a few hours away, so I have to be there. I'm there, but I was designated the chief operator by the school, and I am an employee. So I guess that's how I get away with it.
Some years ago, when I was still working with Clear Channel, they were in the midst of buying a group of stations and had an LMA, but it was still owned by someone else. And I actually got a check every month for several hours in order to be their chief operator because I had to be an employee.
So in the rules, 73.1870 for chief operators, the preference is illustrated, I believe, in the language toward being an employee of the station. And under certain criteria, for instance, chief operator for a non-directional AM station, not to exceed 10 kilowatts, and FM stations may be either an employee of the station or engaged to serve on a contract basis for whatever number of hours each week is deemed necessary by the licensee to keep the station's technical operation in compliance. So there are some other ones where it says the TV world, it sounds like you do have to be an employee, oddly enough.
But for high power or directional, yes.
Right.
Okay. Let's take a look now at the maintenance log. Does a station have to have a maintenance log? What's your experience?
No, but it's helpful.
Mark?
No, it's not required, but it is helpful.
Okay.
I think it's common sense. I mean, you know, you have a history, you have a
And you don't-
background. As a contract engineer, I walk into some of these sites and I'm like, did they ever write anything down? Oh, it's all on the wall right there by the 66 block. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the other thing is I was taught you don't call it a log. You call it maintenance activity or some non-log word. So it's not a log or notes or some germane term like that.
Still walks like a duck.
Yes, but you know, I'm just, you know, that was back in the days when I actually knew who the inspector was because he kept coming to my station.
Well, technically, you could call it a log, and technically the inspector doesn't get to see it. But what do you call it, a log or maintenance activity? What should be there? We've already covered off air or out of tolerance. What would you put in a maintenance log? Why have one?
Filter changes. Did I check the fans? General site security, like there's a big pile of ants by the back door. Call the exterminator. You know, non-broad stuff like that.
Did I hear you say called? C-A-L-L-E-D, called the exterminator, or?
Call C-A-L-L. I don't exterminate ants and hornets. That's a professional job.
No, I mean called as in you did it.
Oh yeah, I did it or took care of it. But I generally call the expert because they got a truck full of nasty stuff.
I had a contact from someone in the field over the last month about a station where the engineer on duty, employee, kept claiming that he checked the air conditioner and the generator, but in reality hadn't touched them in over a year. And well, you know where that's headed. Clogged air filter, non-working Jenny.
Yeah, generators are, I think any site that has a generator, it has to have its own section. I've walked into sites where there's no oil. The diesel pigs are down to, you know, scum level. And I mean, it's just, and the person that was there either didn't care, or just wasn't technically qualified. So in all of the cases where I have either a motor generator, God forbid they're still out there, or a generator, I have a separate section where I'll detail that I made sure that it runs, it started, fuels are correct, fluid levels are correct. I think the generator is almost as important as you know, is the tube and the transmitter the right way.
And did you test it under load? Because
Yes.
how often the timer
Once a year.
works beautifully, the thing starts on the regular schedule. The second it switches to a load, it will crash or, you know.
I took 4 stations off the air the second day on my job in Houston during drive time. because I pushed the load tests. Nobody had tested on load for years. So we didn't have a generator. We had a motor.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Again,
always,
we all have stories like this here in Tucson. When Dana was the market manager, engineering manager, the power went out. The Tucson city power went out. So he went out, tried to start the generator. It wouldn't start. Couldn't find any keys to open up the doors. Finally used a crowbar and pulled it open, only to find the battery completely dead. And it took them to bring a truck around and some jumper cables and finally got the generator running, which would have been not necessary had there been regular maintenance checks.
Well, another thing with generators, particularly in some states like maybe California, is you need to start logging or recording how many hours it runs per month and per annum because of pollution concerns.
Oh boy.
I don't do that because I'm in Texas, but
even Dallas has gotten real big on that. You need to log your hours in the big cities because everybody is on some kind of air threshold warning. Some agency is threatening their funding if they don't get it cleaned up.
Yep.
So would this be a separate log in this case, David?
I would do it that way just because somebody's going to look at it.
And you don't want the city messing around with your other activities and things like that.
Yeah, or
I just
TCEQ or whoever. The other thing we didn't mention, I don't think, was just conventional, all of the transmitter readings. I don't think it has to be done every day or every week.
That's
But
exactly where I was headed.
You want the factory test sheet info, and there's nothing like coming into a site. It's like, okay, this transmitter's been on the air for 3.5 years or 33.5 years. When was it last working? You go through it and say, the exciter is putting out 1/4 of the power the test sheet says it did. Did you make up for that somewhere else? Is there an attenuator you took out? If it's a tube transmitter, you come in and say, the voltage and current are not way off, but there is no grid drive at all. And you wonder, how long has it been like this?
All right, let's take that a little further now. Let's say that you have a transmitter. First of all, how often should you take a set of readings? And then secondly, what should be in there? And in addition to voltage and current, what would you want to see? Should you be called in to a transmitter site you hadn't been to perhaps ever before?
Yeah, I just want to know, if the smoke isn't pouring out, when did this just go from fixed to broken? If there's a big knife switch and we have timestamp video of when someone threw that, that would be acceptable. But you don't get that. At least back when we had announcers, somebody knew what was wrong.
Yes, but you can't always get that information.
You couldn't get it. It might be 3 weeks later, you have fixed it working through deductive means. And then the night jock said, oh, that was the night we all decided to.
Yeah. Had one, this goes back 40 some years, station died right at power change because he went from one transmitter to another. But he marked it down as 20 minutes later because, well, he was late changing the transmitter. And now we had to figure out why it died, what caused it. Well, we found out later that it was a short in the high voltage transformer, but it happened right at sign on, as it were, transfer.
On my Class Ds, I only have remote controls. So again, they're Class D educationals for colleges. So they do have remote controls. They have been instructed that they don't have to take a log. But the way I'm teaching the students there is each time it's a real radio station, it's on the air. Yeah, okay, they stream, but every student that comes in looks at the remote control, makes sure the transmitter's on the air, and puts their initials on the programming log. That way, at least I know they've got hands on it. And there are alarms on these things, but what we're trying to do is teach the students that it's real radio and they should pay attention to things like that. And, you know, that little remote control that's underneath the rack right there that has numbers, you know, is it on the air? Isn't it on the air? If it isn't on the air, then you need to call me. So I think, you know, some of that training is really important now too, especially, you know, as we get further away from, I don't want to say professionals, but you know what I mean.
Well, I showed a little slide last week while we're talking with Jeff, and maybe you remember one of the things that needs to be checked is the battery in your transmitter, lest you come back after a power outage and had forgot who it was and what power level it was supposed to run. Or what about the PA temperature, whether it be the actual PA with tubes or your output transistors. And you want to be able to see if there's any deviation, and that might point you to an air filter, or it might point you to something else. Anything else? It could
Well,
be
one thing, I run one of Jeff's transmitters, and you know, one thing is it's a good idea to just pull the logs from that and save them, just so you can answer those kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to do that on ours. You got to do it about every month and a half where you lose data. You know, it overwrites after a certain number of entries.
Yeah, that's a limitation in some remote control or transmitters, the amount of RAM that's available for.
Yeah, but if you do it once a month, you know,
Yeah.
then you can at least go back and look at it, you know, see what happened.
How about your tower lights? Where do they fit into the logging arrangement?
Any licensee on the tower can be cited.
And I'm not talking about the daily observation. I'm talking about what we used to call the quarterly.
Well, you have to notify the FAA within what, 30 minutes of a failure?
Well, yes, that's true. But what about the quarterly? Has anybody ever really checked to see how your photocells work?
Nope.
Occasionally. Yeah, usually we build them, we'll check them. At a tower site the other day, small aggregator sold out to the biggest of the aggregators, and they came out to replace the lighting system. It was nice to know that the very high rent goes to something that shows up on the tower.
I've seen cases where someone has thrown their jacket over the photocell, only to find out the lights didn't turn on.
Yeah, I've seen that in a few times doing inspections. I've also observed and recommended changes to the lighting sample systems. There have been a couple where they had rebuilt the tower-based doghouse, and the wall faced the viewing angle of the cell that's supposed to be going toward the northern sky. And so the lights were on more than they were off because it was closely coupled to the wall. But certainly the intent is supposed to be tested and reported periodically, the quarterly inspection. And it's also a good idea, not talking from the FCC inspection standpoint or the ABIP inspection standpoint, but quarterly, go walk around to the anchor bases if you have a guide tower, just make sure something hasn't fallen on there. You never know, a tree, because it's 1,000 feet away from your tower base, maybe, or well, probably less than that, but you might miss something, and you might be able to get ahead of things if you do check that kind of stuff.
And you want to walk around and just notice the hardware laying around.
Sure.
Is the ground, are dead soldiers beginning to populate your site? One of the other things is, even if you have the landlord primarily responsible for the lights, you really do need that letter, the master tenant, master occupancy agreement. A lot of the consolidators are not good about sending those.
On one trip to a guy wire insulator, I found a landscaper had mowed one of the porcelain insulators and broke it, so I get that replaced.
And so would this be something that you should have written into the log as a checklist? Do you like to do that, or do you like to see things where they you remember them yourself.
Put it on paper. It doesn't count if it doesn't have a date and a piece of paper.
But I think Barry was asking, is it a form you fill in, or are you working on like a legal pad or a spiral? I have notebooks at most of my transmitter sites, and I take a lot of pictures and a lot of videos using the phone. You just walk through the site, and I also find it real helpful on inventories. If someone asks, what do you have now? It's funny what you can't remember, and the older I get, the less I depend on my less than state-of-the-art memory. But you go to the pictures and say, oh, yeah, that processor or that STL receiver got swapped out for a, several months ago, and I didn't update it. And one of the questions, this ought to be like an annual thing, is, do you have a book or a file representing a book for every piece of equipment at every site? If there's a book back at the studio, that's pretty useless if you're at the tower and you don't have internet to download a copy. There needs to be a Rubbermaid tub that the bugs can't get into, that the dirt can't get into, and you need hand tools, granola bars, bottled water, and the books for everything at that site.
Amen.
Yeah, I think extensive picture taking is the key. When I walk into a new client, the first thing I do is take my camera and just shoot pictures. I've gotten terabytes of pictures from sites. And the good thing is I actually used one of those a few days ago when I had my client called and had a problem. And I went back to the picture and I said, I actually talked to him over the phone using the picture I had with him standing in front of the equipment and got it back on the air. So I think pictures are really key.
That's a really good thing and should be part of your regular inspection and maintenance logs. By the way, Tim, your microphone just jumped up about 15 dB.
I used to do photo albums with mom and pop stations. If they had, here's your 3 kilowatt transmitter for a class A. These are the adapters to put the exciter into the antenna. And we would just take pictures of them doing it every step. And in the photo album, these are the wrenches that will take those connectors apart. These are pictures of you, the owner, doing it just step by step by step. Because even then we realized, we're not always going to be there to help them or talk them through these things.
Is this something that should be on the maintenance log?
Or maybe the repair log.
Yeah. 2 shots.
Yeah.
Can you find out who lives in that house there in the bullseye there?
There are a number of people, and what the tower guy finally did, I'm told, is he sighted it down, and it was at the edge of the transmitter property. They kind of know it's not the ones that you see, but it's off to the left of this picture. I understand they're investigating, as they say.
Isn't it usually a case of people are shooting at the lights they miss and they nick your feed lines?
Yeah, usually so.
I've heard of people getting big metal plates inside the tower structure behind the lights to protect the cabling.
Well, down in Houston, they took well casings and strapped them around as a jacket over the heliacs and rigid lines going up. So it at least had a buffer to blast through before they missed the tower lights and hit the transmission line.
Was that just behind the lights, or was it the whole length of the tower?
No, it wasn't the whole length. It was probably within 40 feet up and down from the lights, just for those errant bullets.
Yeah.
Did they have to do any kind of an engineering thing in regard to weight, wind load, and balance?
Well, I inherited the site at Entercom many, many years ago, of course. Honestly, I have no idea whether the previous owner that actually did the installation went through that, but it would be appropriate, especially it could be a fair amount of weight. But I think there were only 3 levels of lights on the tower, I think. Beacon and maybe there were 2 beacons, and because over 300. So yeah, probably 2 beacons and at least a couple sets of side lights. So
Also, it kind of depends on how rural it is. If you're out in an oil field, you are a target. As you get closer to town, the edge of town, at some point, you stop getting quite as many shooting incidents.
Yeah.
We had a site that it was constant. The building was at the edge of civilization. You could see it from there, but people would go out and shoot it endlessly. I got the boss to approve a largish in 2000, give or take. It was a $5,000 prize, and just said, listen, rat out your friends for fun and profit, because we decided whoever's climbing these things, who's ever shooting at them, they're not alone. They come out here with their friends. It's like when the guys climb the towers and decide to unscrew the lights or throw the parts over. I dare you to do it. And then somebody goes up, and we said, we're going to put up this sign, and we're just going to make it easy for you to make some money off the stupidity of your friends. And we stopped getting strafed.
There are a lot of things, obviously, that can be on the log. And as we think about it, you can come up with more. You can talk about the condition of the locks. You can talk about the condition of the fencing around the site. You can talk about any indications that there have been visitors that shouldn't have been there. I've got a picture from Albuquerque where a guy drove up with his pickup truck, pulled out a bolt cutter, cut the chain, and went in and rummaged around looking for things to steal. And I understand that this is a problem in many remote sites, and probably is a point for more security, camera or otherwise, but they got a full frontal facial look at this guy, and I think they got his license number. But you got to be careful as to what's out there.
One of the most, how's the audio now, by the way? Better?
A little low.
Low? How about now?
Yeah.
Better?
Just
coming
fine.
up.
Better.
Damn M Audio products. So the most fun I had was upstate New York. I went to the site, and I wasn't paying attention, and I went inside and I started reading through the log, and it said, make sure you close the gate on your way out so the sheep don't get out. Well, I neglected to close the gate.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that's bad.
So trying to round up, I don't know how many sheep it was, but anyway, the guy was pissed, and I had to buy dinner. But, I read the log, and it said, make sure the gate is closed so you don't let the sheep out. And I just thought the guy was, anyway. So pay attention to those wild animals out there.
So servings of lamb for dinner.
Curry.
You have to
Lamb
get
curry.
too close to the AM.
It's good to have friends as your neighbors rather than people that are happy to see the vandals come by.
Well, don't feel too bad. The first station I worked for, first job I had, was doing racing results. And at the time, to broadcast them was legal. To give them over the phone was not. So one of the local bookies missed one of the races and called, and I refused to give him the information. I was threatened. Of course, I'm 13 years old. I was threatened, and a day or so later, somebody shot through the windows.
Not much fun.
No. And also, as far as security, just down the road from me is the transmitter site for WHYN in Springfield. There is no fencing. Fencing around each tower, but that's about it. There are satellite dishes just sitting out in the yard.
And it's rat out a location in Maine owned by one of the big boys that has complete insecurity. I mean, literally to the point where I could push the door open into the old transmitter building. It was just ridiculous. No response when I called them, by the way.
WHYN is owned by I Have No Heart Radio.
Well, when we think about all these aspects of maintenance and checks, how often do you think someone should check a transmitter site?
That really depends on the transmitter side. I have places where if I'm there once a quarter, nothing has changed except for a little buildup of dust. You know, I may vacuum or sweep, and that's it. Everything is exactly where it was. But those are like radar, you know, like dew line equipment. It's really out in the sticks and it's getting left alone. The other sites where I'd want to see it every week. But it's still a question of, is it inside equipment that you're worried about age or lightning getting it, something precipitous happens, or are we worried about the neighbors and the vandals? The AM sites, and I've read different people, I don't have any sites that are attacked like some of these AMs. The people who are laying cement down over their ground radials or trying to tar goo, I don't have much of that, and I'm very thankful, because none of that sounds like, that is just not how I want to spend the rest of my life, is trying to keep copper under a tower where I have run people off property before. You'll see them three-wheeling on your site. They'll say, well, it's not posted. I said, yeah, but you know it's not yours. And you had to like throw the bike over the fence to get onto the property. So you could kind of take a clue from that.
Yeah, you might be able to. I remember being up in Detroit one year and going from one to another site with a friend, and there was a 9-stick, then 1500 that some of you might be familiar with. And there were at least 12.5 people just wandering around in the field, some walking dogs, some just walking. And there were fences, but there were holes in the fences.
Lynn Willoughby and I rebuilt an AM in Jacksonville, Florida. Large site, low on the dial, and people would climb the fence. You'd see them walking across the property, and rather than go around, they would climb over the fence. They'd throw their bikes over the fence, cross the property, throw them over the next fence. And the owner of the site put in cameras, had live monitoring back to Texas. One day I'm talking to their DE on the phone, and he's like, excuse me, my rent-a-cops are stealing my copper.
You need a new company for that.
Yeah, I was going to mention that about the camera, because they're so cheap now. We have these Uniden, Wi-Fi cameras. You can get a whole set for like $300. We have them inside and outside, and have them on all the racks. So something happened, you could bring it up and look at it. So they're really cheap now. It's good insurance.
They really are, and you can have them send the notes. There are a couple of problems. I have people who said, I don't want my bald spot showing on cameras, which has actually come up. But yeah, if you get the ones where it starts sending messages because there's sudden motion, that's kind of handy.
I would like to have anyone that has had a really good experience would like to help us do a little tech tip for the BDR. That would be great. I know that recently Costco was selling a trio, 3 Lorex Wi-Fi cameras for less than $100. So
we point one at the cars coming in to get the license plate, and even if they destroy the camera, it doesn't matter. You paid $50, now you got their license plate. I keep extra ones on the shelf, and if they smash it, I just go put a new one on.
Good point. Good point.
But by the time they figure it out, they've been nabbed, or at least you got their plate. You can call Daddy and see why the kid was out at the tower at night.
The comments about generators caused me to think about how often are people scheduling any kind of inspection or maintenance of their UPSs, because those are a lot more prevalent than generators, and they seem to be on a lot of critical systems.
I have a previous associate who went on a 3-year battery change cycle. And what I'm finding out is that should be more like 2 years, at least with the APCs that we use and in our rack. 3 is too long. By the time you have a failure, it's too late. So I backed up all the battery changes to 24 months.
24 may be a bit hair trigger, but yeah, the 3 years is definitely too long. And the less hospitable the storage is, the warmer that room is. And if this is just a concrete bunker with electrical on the wall, that's that's a device to sit there and dry out, to tear up batteries and dry out capacitors.
What you don't want is you don't want the battery to swell, because then you can't get it out.
At what point do you replace the UPS because you may be concerned that its components no longer perform the function that they
That
were
I'm not
intended?
doing. I've never done that. I've got UPSs that are 15 years old.
If they stop self-testing, and the problem where we get on the fairly large ones is you start getting notes from the manufacturers that if it's a number whatever control board, they can't get parts for it. They're pretty garden variety, L's, RCs. The microprocessors weren't custom, but if you have something that has a lot of custom code, operating systems, even on embedded systems, do eventually go out of style. So at 15 or 20 years, you could have sailed to the no product support on the underlying parts. I think for UPSs and generators, you need to just figure what is the quietest day of the year you can do. And I kind of like New Year's Eve. If you're in town and you're on the clock the last week of the year, go to the station, midnight if you like, pull the big breaker, just disconnect and see what UPSs pick up and see what fails. Otherwise, you just will not know. There's no good day to do it.
Yeah, amen.
UPSs are the bane. It used to be generators. Now it's UPSs. I was just looking down at my CyberPower to see how that's doing. And the nice thing about some of these newer UPSs now with SNMP and others, they'll bark at you and they'll tell you if they're sick. And I know with the CyberPowers and some of the others, I've got the communication port on them. And so even at my house here, if I lose power, it barks to my cell phone and I know, hey, I've lost power at my house. So I think
you
that's
also
really
need
important.
the website that will check them back, or the ping app, because if the board loses its mind and it stops talking, you don't want to, when it fails, you don't want to say, oh, about 5 days ago, this thing stopped talking to anybody and we didn't catch it.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
true.
you can auto ping them.
Now, you raised another issue here, David. You seem to be reading my mind as we go when you mentioned the word parts. Now, it used to be, for those of us over the age of that you were supposed to have a certain number of spare tubes and all the parts necessary to keep the transmitter rolling. And very few stations do that anymore. In fact, as Jeff mentioned yesterday, or last week, sorry, few of the spare parts kits are sold by manufacturers, largely because 90% of them are not ever used. What parts do we need to keep on the shelf? And when do we need to make that note in the maintenance log?
Oh, fuses for sure.
Yes. I think at a site, you need to stock every replacement part except the capacitors. And if you're a contractor, the contractor ought to have a fresh set of pretty much every value of capacitor, because your stock may rotate. The stuff sitting at a tower is dying of old age.
Like UPSs, capacitors don't have an unlimited lifespan. And whether it be little caps under the PA cavity in an old Continental, or something that is much more recent, a power supply for the EAS machine.
Of course, the RF caps, the difference is they're awfully stable chemically and electrically. Their problem is they do tend to short, or they'll get static or lightning discharges and they'll blow open. But I'm thinking like your power supply electrolytics, our chemistry experiments, they are going downhill from the day they're manufactured.
And it gets sillier than that. I'm aware of a station where they lost their Sage power supply. So they plugged in a power supply that was made for a laptop at 16 volts. And it worked for a while, and then it died.
The power supply or the Sage died?
The power supply, of course. Sage won't run on less than 16 volts and enough current to, of course, it's not current you need to run the printer anymore, but you still need current. In the old days, that's all it took was a EAS test to stress the power supply to make the thing shut down, and many stations never got the EOS for that reason. That isn't as big a problem as it used to be. What else, before we leave the transmitter site, should there be a list of
follow-up question related to parts and things of that nature? How do you track what you have and what needs replacement or restocking? And where do you keep that? How many other people have that access so that they might know if somehow you're not available?
I have clients where I do site checks for a bigger organization that have all of this in Google Docs. And for them, it's you carry the barcode wand, and we have labels for just about everything. I don't have as elaborate a system for that for my mom and pops, but I look at that and think that would be worthwhile to have a thing like that. But the national ministries are pretty good about their systems, and they know where their equipment is, and everything has a code. So if you find it under a workbench after a year, it's like, this is where it is, and this is who it belongs to. Address labels on things. If you go through a lot of other people's equipment, a label, and maybe just kind of like you used to have hotel keys, if found, just drop in mail and it'll get there.
Many times if you are asked by a friend in the market to lend them something, it may not come back. They may not remember where to send it back.
And for them, an extra set of address labels inside the device. I'm like, okay, yeah, this may really be yours, but why does it have one of my bumper stickers inside it?
Yeah.
The sticker did say KEND is everywhere, but this is nuts.
And do you keep a record of whom you've loaned things to?
That's what the maintenance log is all about, both incoming and outgoing. If you replace something, you note it in the maintenance log, and you remember, I got to reorder that. If you slend it out, put it there. If you borrowed something, you should put it in there too. I owe David Stewart a capacitor or a smack in the head or something. I don't know.
4CX 15,000, 3 pizzas, and everything we drank that night.
That works for me.
What do people do for moving things around inside? Sometimes you have a hand truck, and I have a folding hand truck, but I've been wondering lately about getting some kind of perambulator or really small engine puller or something to carry things around the building and help lower it into things or get it up over to a rack or something, because I just getting tireder and tireder, and it's harder and harder to hold big things up. And exciters, gadgets in a rack keep getting bigger and heavier.
One of the things I've used on occasion is to get a rack shelf, a heavy duty rack shelf, and then you can slide the equipment in, then bolt it in, and then remove your rack shelf if you want.
Yeah, you install it upside down to support the weight of the unit. I've done that a bunch of times. The other thing I've done for some, somewhat lighter items is to actually put some screws in through the, you should be able to take them out once you're done, but have some screws poking out through the front. You put them in from the back, just reach around, and that way they can hook the top set of holes, and then you can, that'll kind of hold the weight until you can get the bottom screws in.
Good point. Now here's one more thing that maybe not the maintenance log, maybe not in any particular place, but probably in an operational log of some sort or operational book. Who do you call when you have a problem with a particular piece of equipment? And the reason I mention that is that most manufacturers now offer you a PDF file, or they offer you a CD-ROM at best. So if you need to find a phone number that is current, it's not always easy. You need to know whom to speak to. Wouldn't it be good to have a little list of the folks that are key to your operation?
And Barry, one suggestion too, I got burned. You were talking about the unit with the wrong power supply. I've done that before, and it's getting hard to read some of the power supplies, especially the wall warts. So I put a big label on each one of them. I mean, we've got tons of spares, but you know, plus 15 volts, plus 9 volts, you know, 9 volts AC, because it's a real mess when you plug a 9-volt AC wall wart into something that wants 12 volts DC or something. And it's getting harder, these old eyes, to see. So,
That's a good point. And I'll also add to that with the newer USB plugs, is it the C? Some of them will carry voltage and some of them won't. As an example, I've had a couple of the solid state drives that can read and some that can't read because it requires the voltage. And it's the cord.
The other two things is label the power supply as to, is it center positive or center negative?
Yeah.
Because that's real rude. And the other thing is, and I found that I have a bunch of battery packs that look like a standard USB cable, except they don't pass data. They only pass voltage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that drove me nuts because I couldn't figure out why something wasn't working, because I wanted a short cord. So I grabbed one.
If you're labeling something, also put just a month, year designator on it, because you can't always read the manufactured date.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of things just sitting on the shelf, you know, plug-in power supplies after a few years, they're probably not worth the time trying.
On that list of people to call, don't forget the generator maintenance company. Don't forget the air conditioning maintenance company. Don't forget whoever's going to be involved with your electrical service, that is your local utility. You need to have all those numbers.
And the fuel supplier.
Because if you can arrange to know, remember we used to know the guy at the test board at the phone company, and when problems occurred, you didn't have to deal with we'll be out there by Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. You could talk to somebody and get an instant answer. Like, you know, the trouble sounds fine leaving here. But the issue is getting to know whom to call for any particular emergency or difficulty is not easy to put together. It takes some effort.
Internet service provider contacts.
Yep.
ISP contacts.
And with that, include the account numbers as well, because there's nothing worse than being at a transmitter site, having a power outage, and you get the automated attendant and they want an account number.
Well, and not just account numbers. Now they're wanting user and password for those. There's somebody who's the authorized person, and you may not be that person. You're just like, look, I'm at a site, there's equipment, it does not have power. Can you help me? But, oh, no. Emma in the office is authorized to talk to us about that, and they won't even volunteer that information.
You bring up a good point, Dave, and they'll also sometimes ask you, what is the telephone number associated with the account?
Beats the wind out of me.
Corporate office, yeah. And I don't even know what it is.
Another trick, the automated systems in Texas one is the meter, the long, I think it's a 25-digit meter number. And if you're at a site, you need to figure out which meter is yours. If you got a site with 4 or 5 meters.
Or the pole number. The number on
give them the right one, they can actually look at the meter and go, oh yeah, it's out. We'll come fix that.
Or the pole number. Sometimes knowing the pole number gives them the location.
Yes, I did that about a month ago. Pole number, blah, 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 is on fire. You might want to come put it out.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of your comment, Barry, about up on our site, we have a number of metal signage on the fences that talks about who you call if the gate malfunctions or one of the big water towers springs a leak. But what about needing to log in or out the presence of the radiation signs that we're supposed to have on the different fence points? Is that something we have to log that we see, like tower lights?
I would put in the maintenance log to remind yourself to make sure you replace them. Yeah.
Would it also be reasonable to note the date and time that they were replaced? Maybe take a picture?
Yeah, maybe.
In my mind, a picture takes care of that because with the modern phones, you get date, time, and where you were when you took the picture.
Mhm.
You know, so you can say, yep, I did it this, or you can say this sign was here yesterday.
You can never have too much information, really. I mean,
It's cheap to store pictures. Put them on a thumb drive. There's
Mhm.
nothing to it.
That's right. I'll ask this question. Has the pandemic changed your maintenance efforts in any substantial way? And if you tell me it's because I have to go to everybody's house to fix their console.
I'm just thinking of being up at the tower in a room that's tight enough as it is, but it's got 8 clients in it, and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out who gets to wear the mask and who gets to stand outside.
Well, I can tell you that my personal maintenance has changed. I just recently got over COVID. It's very mild.
Well, I'm glad that you recovered.
So am I.
Okay.
Now I have a question. We were talking about tower lighting. If you have a 3-tower inline array, is it necessary to light all 3 towers?
That's up to the FAA.
That's
what
depends.
ASRs are about.
Okay, because the WHYN tower has 3 and the center tower is not lit.
Is it shorter than the other 2?
No, they're all the same height.
May have been a
Sometimes with-
variance when they, when they filed the towers, that may have asked for a variance on that. Who knows?
And strangely, there are 2, there's one Air Force base, Westover Air Force Base, and an airport within probably 10 miles of the tower site.
Of course, at 10 miles, the glide slope of that is usually you're falling at about a 1% rate. And if you're 20,000 feet out, yeah, 10 miles away means you could have a very tall tower out there. It really depends. I saw a permit the other day. It's a 6-tower site. Another station's moving in to do a diplex, but the FCC license said 4 of these 6 towers are lit. This tower and this tower, which you're using, don't have ASRs at all. Now, if this other tower, which is slightly taller on the property, is ever taken down, you will register that tower. And I thought it was an odd thing to read on a construction permit.
Yeah.
So one of the considerations on tower lighting is the distance between towers. If a tower is within the fall zone of a taller tower, the taller tower usually is the one that is selected to be lit, and then the other ones that are within the fall zone of that tower can be requested. That who knows what formula the FAA actually uses, and it may be totally subjective by the individual who's reviewing it. But you can ask for anything. You can say, I actually asked one time to eliminate tower lighting because within the property of an AM site that was a 2-tower DA, trees had grown up taller than the tower structures. And we ended up getting a waiver, and they eliminated the tower lighting because there were other physical obstructions that exceeded the heights of the towers. So there's all sorts of possibilities out there.
Yeah, there's examples everywhere. If you look at the 2 towers outside of Hartford, Connecticut, they're both strobed. What are they? Well over 1,000 feet. Yet up here in Gray, Maine, there's 2 towers that are within hundreds of yards of each other. One's strobed and the other one isn't. Down here in Biddeford, I have 2 radio towers that are 500 yards apart. One's lit and the other one isn't. So it's just the way the I guess they applied to the FAA for lighting.
Some years ago, I did a 6-tower array, and one of the neighbors complained. Turns out that they had a little dirt airstrip, and the FAA determined that the closest that they would ever come to the towers would be at the end where they were off on the ground, because they would go the other direction. It's the only way they were allowed to take off. And any other air vehicle that would hit these towers would have hit the 9,000-foot mountains next to them first. So I know we're starting to lose a few folks because they have to go places. I'm not going to cut the conversation off, but I did want to show this real quick for anyone that is of interest. It is a 1996 Data World set of maps, which are all the station patterns and things in the country. And I have that I've just pulled out of my shop, and I have this that I've just pulled out of my shop. Anyone wants to send me money for postage, it's yours. Meanwhile, back at the maintenance department, how important are computer records? We talked about video, your camera records, but how important is it to keep it in the computer?
Depends on how you search for how did I fix that last.
I think it all goes with accessibility, Barry, on how quickly the information you need is accessible.
Well, a lot of stations have an app or whatever for staff to write down maintenance issues, whether it be a microphone cord that doesn't work or transmitter that seems to be bulky, and they work off these maintenance tags, if you will. Is that a reasonable way to go? Certainly not, I would think, in the smallest of stations, but still, there needs to be a way for staff to communicate, and more so today than ever, since everybody's in a different place.
That's called a ticketing system. And unfortunately, what a lot of the larger companies have done is they use the ticketing systems as metrics on how much work you're doing. So I really despise ticketing systems because it's letting people have information that they don't need, and and it's been my experience that they only want to try to use it against you instead of letting you have access to that information.
And it used to be handy that if you had a pile of these and said, look, that news vehicle is shared by a day and a night crew. If you let us buy one more vehicle and we make it one camera person, one camera, one recorder, one vehicle, we think we will save on maintenance costs. And this came from a situation, we had 4 crews and we had 3 vehicles. The shared vehicle had twice the wear and tear of the others, but it had like quadruple the bills because you could always blame anything you did to the other person. We went in the manager and we just took a stack of trouble reports, maintenance records, and said, we think if you buy us a 4th station wagon, this will pay for itself pretty quickly. And it did.
That's a good trick.
I also want to say that ticketing systems and so forth, it's management having a computer trying to manage a human being. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather a human interaction instead of having to be answerable to a machine.
Yeah, but shouldn't there be a way to list what is currently of import? And if you do it all verbally, then you can get lost or you can forget one.
Yes, if you keep it yourself, that's fine. What I'm against is corporate ticketing systems because they don't accomplish anything.
David is right. It's an easily abused system. Maybe you set up just an extra text account for the station's maintenance deals, and that way, it's like a Twitter deal saying, hey, did anyone hear about the such and such machine or this fader on the console in the studio or just some shared problem? You want everyone to know about it, but you also want to be able to say, that has been replaced, that has been fixed, that the levels have been adjusted, that has stopped being a problem. And everyone know about it. But it's like, how do you you don't want it all brought through one person. You want to communicate across the group that need to know.
And in both directions.
And we may not have a good tool for that anymore. The ticketing system really is a it was great in an earlier age, and as a place to fix blame, it has become a less good thing.
Yeah, I had a manager that actually said, you may not fix anything until there is a ticket for it, and you can not work on anything unless there's a ticket for it. And when you work on it, you have to fix the ticket. Then one day I got a call from a station. I'm driving, and he goes, hey, I need to get this fixed right away. And I pulled over on the Jersey Turnpike, having to open up an app. I said, okay, you got to fill out a ticket before I'm allowed to work. Because if I worked beforehand or in retroactive, I would get in trouble. That's how ridiculous some of these systems are.
Well, that's the way the phone company was. We had a 6 or an 8 pair cable or something going across the driveway. It got hooked by a tractor, pulled the thing down, and I spliced my pair and called them and told them to fix it. And they said they couldn't touch the other ones because there was no trouble ticket for the other 6 or 8, which meant in theory, they could make 6 or 8 calls to fix the same cable.
Yeah, bureaucrats do that way. I have one more question that I'll pose and or thought, and then I'll leave it open for further discussion. But I only have one other thing on my little list, and that is plan for problems. It is important in your maintenance protocol to plan for problems. What would you do if the STL died? What would you do if the power went out? What would you do if, so that you don't find yourself scrambling? It's part of what I was mentioning earlier about knowing whom to call. Well, we should look and see where all the, you might call them single points of failure might be, and plan. What do you do if?
Barry, one thing I'd really like to do is keep an image of each hard drive. And I usually keep it on, if it's a workstation, keep it on top of the workstation in a static bag. Each one of them has that. So it seems like hard drives are the thing that fail mostly. Broadcast equipment's pretty reliable. And if you've got new transmitters, things like that, I don't have too much trouble with that. But it's usually I don't know if a lot of people I don't know if the jury's out about the solid state drives, if they're really more reliable or not, or I don't know. I'm about to replace about 4 workstations. I'm vacillating on whether to get a solid state drive or just get a 4 terabyte Western Digital Enterprise. They seem to be pretty reliable. Keeping an image, so if it goes down, you just swap it out.
I have service contracts on my big drives because, if you got a 4 terabyte drive that goes south and you don't have a service contract on it, what are you going to do with that data when the thing crashes? So I've actually used it twice and probably saved about $5,000 on discs that went south. So it's probably a good idea to look into it at least.
Ray, I will tell you that solid state drives improve performance dramatically. You wouldn't believe the difference. I don't know about the life. I finally broke down and bought my first SSD earlier this year, and thank God it's running and it's very solid. Yeah, I'm keeping images, and also I keep the number to drive savers available too, just in case. But the SSD drives are being reported to be as reliable now. They fixed that whole problem with the number of writes. I know that.
I've done some research on that, met with one of the main manufacturers of solid state drives, both under their imprint and HP. And yes, that's the point, that the mean time before failure, it meets or exceeds that of mechanical drives now. But you could have any one of them die on any notice. That's the real problem with anything solid state, isn't it? You could have a head fail on a mechanical, or you could have a glitch and a lightning strike, and you could lose a solid state drive. David, I'm going to give you a chance here to talk about one last thing that just popped into my head when we're talking about computers and saying that hard drives are the biggest problem. The biggest problem right now is malware.
Yeah, malware is really, well, I would even push it even further. Ransomware is the biggest problem right now.
Part of malware.
It is a form of malware, but it's narrowed down, and people are running scared with ransomware. And
I hope everybody enjoyed the topic today. I really kind of wanted to zero in on a few things, and I think we did. I'm probably going to turn this into a little article at some point if I find the time.